by the Jamaican government in the early years.
Capture the high and the nobles, don't you know we have a net? Capture the high and the nobles, don't you know we have a net? Capture the high and the nobles in the round.
And for many years, Rastafarians were concentrated in a community called Bacawal. This community was adjacent to Coronation Market, the largest market in Kingston. In 1966, Bacawal was razed by then Minister of Development and Welfare Edward Siaga, who sent bulldozers to destroy the ramshackle dwellings that had been erected, ultimately replacing all the residents with supporters of the ruling Labour Party. Rastafarians were dispersed to other areas of the country where many had already taken up residence in rural outposts and hilltops. Some in Jamaica consider this dispersal to be the single most formative moment.
So I'm back to do my next video, and this video is on the Coral Gardens massacre that happened in Jamaica in April 1960. So I'm getting my information from the Jamaica Observer. I shall post the link to this newspaper article down below. And I've just remembered to add the link to the Black History Studies underneath my Marcus Garvey video, so you can go check that out. So it says, Public Defender Arlene Harrison Henry on December 9th, 2015 sent an explosive report to Parliament, the result of an investigation into several incidents, including the blood-stained Coral Gardens affair, which has recommended reparations and apology by the Jamaican state to Rastafarians. The Jamaica Observer presents part 3 of an edited version of the report. After that groundation, numerous Rastafari were arrested for ganja and were beaten and forcibly trimmed. In May 1958, the police burned down Prince Emmanuel's Rastafari camp and arrested him. In 1958, 9 Rastafari families were forcibly evicted from lands in Spanish Town and their homes destroyed. In October 1958, the police raided a Rastafari camp in Westmoreland, imprisoned its leader, who was later convicted and sentenced. Further confrontations between Rastafari and the police occurred in Linstead in 1958, when it was alleged that a group of Rastafarians attacked 2 police officers. During the incident, the police shot and killed a Rastafarian. 4 Rastafarians were arrested but reportedly were never seen again. The 1958 groundation has therefore been described as a decisive point in its deterioration of relations between the government and the public on the one hand, and the Rastafari movement on the other, as a result of the heavy public emphasis on the antisocial elements of Rastafari. In May 1959, there was another confrontation between Rastafari and the police, arising out of a dispute between a Rastafari gatekeeper and a policeman with duties at Coronation Market. The beating of the Rastaman caused a violent reaction by some of the market vendors. The police brought in reinforcements and a police van as well as a fire truck was set afire, allegedly by a group of Rastafarians. There was a physical confrontation between the police and the crowd at the market. The police brought it under control. They then proceeded by the Rastafari area of the nearby Bacawal. There approximately 57 Rastafari were arrested, many beaten, forcibly shaved, and their houses destroyed. In 1959, reputed Rastafari leader Reverend Claudius Henry was found with a letter to Fidel Castro discussing plans to take over Jamaica. Castro had just successfully overthrown the Batista government by armed revolution in Cuba. Then in 1960, Reverend Henry's son, Reynold Henry, led a group of black nationalists in an uprising. He and his co-conspirators were arrested after a large manhunt involving police and soldiers in Sligoville, St. Catherine. It was believed that Henry and his group were planning to overthrow the government of Jamaica. Premier Norman Manley declared a state of emergency, and the army subsequently crushed the uprising. Reynold Henry and his conspirators were convicted for treason and hanged. In the minds of some Jamaicans, The Henry Affair was a nefarious attempted Rastafari revolution. In response, the police embarked on island-wide raids and arbitrary arrests of Rastafari. That saga gave some credence to the view that Rastafari was a potential breeding ground for communists, for violent revolutionaries, and a shelter for criminals. The Rastafarians at Aki Walk in Kingston were repeatedly targeted and harassed by the police. At a Rastafari convention at Aki Walk in 1960, the police arrested almost 100 Rastafarians in what was described as a fairly serious confrontation. Following that incident, it is reported that a group of Rastafarians presented a petition with over 4,000 signatures to the government, requesting that the concerns of the Rastafari community be addressed. Strong anti-Rastafari sentiment was shared by many within the Jamaican government, and indeed Rastafari was the subject of many official communications. By October 1962, Brigadier P.E. Crooks of the Jamaica Defence Force submitted a paper to the Governor-General, Sir Kenneth Blackburn, for consideration by the Defence Board, in which Rastafari was identified as an internal threat to Jamaica's national security. The Brigadier reasoned that the internal threat is well known to readers of this paper and does not require much elaboration. Briefly, communism would try to infiltrate by all possible means and may make active use of the following extreme racial organisations, e.g. the Rastafarians are approximately strength 3,000 to 5,000, not organised, but a potential danger. Official documents of the government of Jamaica, as well as the fact that state agents and resources were brought to bear so heavily and pointedly on the Rastafari community, forcibly suggests the existence of a systematic state policy aimed at the harassment, undermining and suppression of the Rastafari. The nature of the antagonistic relationship between the state and the Rastafari worsened in the 1960s. A 1960 report by University of West Indies lecturers M.J. Smith, Roy Auger and Rex Nettleford is telling. It reported that the general public believes in a stereotype Rastafarian who wears a beard, avoids works, steals, smokes ganja, and is liable to sudden violence. However, the report noted that the stereotype was applicable only to a minority. Recognising that the great majority of the Rastafari brethren are peaceful citizens who do not believe in violence. Further, the authors of the report concluded that the general public, who are quite out of sympathy with the Rastafari, seem to have ranged themselves on the side of the government and the police. Authors of the report observed that the relations between Rastafari brethren and the police have deteriorated sharply over the last few years, even more sharply in the last 4 months, in the course of which the police have carried out extensive raids, made numerous arrests, and in the heat of the moment have indulged in many arbitrary acts against Rastafarians. In conclusion, the 1960 report recommended that the positive action should be taken by the government of Jamaica to meet the reasonable demands of the Rastafari community, and therefore recommended, inter alia, that the freedom of speech and freedom of movement of the Rastafari should be respected. The public should cease to stereotype all Rastafari. The public should learn to recognise that religious people have a right to wear their hair long if they wish. The Minister of Education should prohibit teachers from cutting the hair of children without their parents' permission. The police should leave innocent Rastafari brethren alone, stop cutting off their hair, stop moving them on, stop arresting them on minor pretexts, and stop beating them up. Rastafari brethren should be assisted to establish cooperative workshops. Jamaica should send a mission to Africa to arrange for immigration of Jamaicans who wish to go, build low-rent houses to reduce squatting for Rastafari and other low-income or unemployed people, and build civic centres and training centres and cooperative workshops for Rastafari and other low-income or unemployed people in collaboration with churches and UCWI. Rastafari and their religious beliefs labelled them as uncivilized, cultists, millenarian, and escapist, and tended to focus with negative, distorted characterizations and aspersions on symbols of Rastafari such as locks, beards, ganja, and the divinity of Haile Selassie against Rastafari was sustained continuously over several decades prior to the Coral Gardens incident of 1963 and perpetrated after Coral Gardens. Amendments to the dangerous drugs law was the state's primary tool employed to criminalize a whole section of the Jamaican community. As retired detective Selborne Reed explained in the film Bad Friday, police while at training school often used images of Rastafarians as targets for shooting practice at the shooting range. In the 60s, when the outward appearance of dreadlocks became prevalent among Rastafari, many people were afraid of them. Generally, Rastafarians in Jamaican society were feared and scorned, often stoned, ridiculed and beaten by civilians. They were branded as cannibals and as black heart men. Rastafari thus had to live and function underground for the most part, avoiding public places, streets, transports, and living and travelling in gullies and bushes. So essentially they were basically discriminated against just for choosing to follow the Rastafarian lifestyle. Rastafari resistance to the status quo has been expressed through song, most notably through reggae, food, language, fashion, art, craft, religion, rituals, customs, and communal living. It is within the foregoing social, political, cultural, and religious context of the historical relationship between the state and the Rastafari community that the subject matter of this report and the recommendations herein are considered. Blood ran at Coral Gardens. The events at Coral Gardens in April 1963 marked a significant watershed in the relationship between the Rastafari community and the state. The discrimination against that community was inflicted by the citizenry as well. Indeed, Rastafari had to contend with hostility from many quarters. There are several accounts as to what provoked the Coral Gardens incident. In addition to the written statements and audio-visual interviews collected during the investigation by the public defender, accounts were called from the Gleaner newspaper, as well as from academic and other historically researched publications. The public defender also obtained a copy of the book Rastafarians Uprising at Coral Gardens, Jamaica, 8 Killed and Hundreds Injured, an eyewitness account written by retired police detective Selborne Reed, who was also interviewed on the Bad Friday DVD. According to retired detective Selborne Reed, he and the other police at the Barnett Street Police Station in Montego Bay received a report on Good Friday, April 12, 1963, that the gas station in Coral Gardens was on fire. 6 rifles were distributed among them. Under the command of Inspector John Fisher, the police party boarded a vehicle and headed for Coral Gardens. The inspector in charge of the detail carried the ammunition. Was a 23-year-old rookie cop stationed at the Barnett Street Police Station. He was off duty when the call came. He joined the other police officers deployed in response to the report of the fire at Costas, waving spears, hatchets, and machetes. The police ordered them to drop their weapons. The Rastas complied, but upon realising that the police guns were not loaded, they proceeded to retrieve the spears, hatchets and machetes and attack the police. During the encounter, Inspector John Francis, who was himself wounded, threw out some ammunition to the police officers to defend themselves from the attacking group. On the Star's investigation account, it was not until a young cop constable, Albert Victor Nelson, shouted harsh words to the inspector to let him have ammunition that Inspector John Fisher, who was on the ground struggling to escape being chopped, finally threw out some of the cartridges. He was set upon and chopped all over his body. Miraculously, he survived and was admitted to the UCHWI for extended period. Benjamin Rudolph Franklin's daughter explained that Franklin's father had left a lot of land for him at Coral Gardens, where he did some farming. According to Rastafari elder Ras Jr. Manning, Rudolph lived at Rose Hall and used to farm above Salt Spring in St. James. Many of the Salt Spring residents at the time worked at the Rose Hall property where Rudolph regularly burnt coal. The first encounter between Rudolph and the police occurred when the police raided Rudolph's farm about the time when the crops were ready for reaping. The police reaped what they wanted and chopped down the rest. Rudolph told them he is not a squatter. The police told him that he was too close to Rose Hall. On a second occasion, the police again raided his farm, reaped what they wanted and chopped down the rest. On the third occasion, Rudolph was on a farm working with his machete. The police told him to drop the machete. He refused. They shot him 3 times in the stomach. Rudolph's daughter in the Bad Friday film, that was in and out and about October 1961. Retired Detective Selborne Reed recounted that the police had gone there to serve a summons on Rudolph to leave the property. He was now deceased. In his article in Public Opinion dated April 27, 1963, identifies Rudolph Franklin as the leader of the unlawful events which led to what occurred at Coral Gardens and the confrontation between a Rastafari and the police. He wrote, "Many months ago, Rudolph Franklin was one of the 3 Rastafarian brethren who was shot dead on Thursday, April 11th. And who occupied a plot of land on the Rose Hall estate. The headman of the property, Edward Fowler, who also died on April 11th, brought a policeman to evict the brother off the land. The unarmed brother was shot 6 times by the police and believed to be dead was not taken to hospital until hours after. The brother recovered after months of medical treatment, although he was told by the doctor that he would only live for a short period. He was immediately sentenced to 6 months imprisonment on a charge of having ganja. It was said that upon his release from prison, Rudolph vowed revenge. He had had plastic surgery done to his stomach and reportedly had been told by the doctor that any time the plastic rotted, he would die. This account was related several times and also by 76-year-old Isaac Wright and Bongo Isaac. Maliciously prosecuted, shot, seriously injured, tried, convicted and sentenced for doing nothing wrong on his assessment. Walter Brissett, on the headman of the Rosehall property, in his interview in Bad Friday stated that Rudolph did nothing. On Friday, April 12, 1963, a gas station at Coral Gardens was burnt to the ground, allegedly by a group of Rastafarians. The following day, Sunday, April 13th, the Gleaner front page headline read, 8 killed after attack on gas station. 2 policemen, 3 Rastafarians among the dead. From that report, the police killed were Assistant Superintendent Bertie Scott, Detective Corporal Clifford Melbourne, Kenneth Marsh, Edward Fowler, property headman at Rose Hall Estate, and Albert Carswell, assistant in bond shop manager. Allegedly, the group of Rastafari attacked and killed Edward Fowler while he was tying his goats. They allowed the attendant to flee before dousing the station with gasoline from the pumps. A bystander and travelling salesman, Marsh went to look at what was happening but was chased into a nearby motel where he had been staying. The police party, which included civilians, travelled in 7 vehicles in search of the wanted Rastafarians. A violent confrontation ensued, resulting in the death of civilian Albert Carswell and Detective Corporal Clifford Melbourne. Later, a second police party went in hunt of the wanted Rastafarians. That encounter resulted in the death of Superintendent Scott and another Rastafarian from the group. The response from the political directorate was immediate. A plane was commissioned to fly several people from Kingston to Montego Bay, including the Minister of Home Affairs, Roy McNell, Member of Parliament to the area, Dr. Herbert Eldimer, Chief of Staff of the Jamaica Defence Force, Brigadier Paul Crook, Commissioner of the Police, Noel Croswell, Senior Superintendent of the Police, Vincent Bunting, Superintendent of Police, George Mullen, several top CID detectives and a detachment of the recently established police striking force. Later that day, 9 motor units of the JDF, which included 2 armoured vehicles, travelled to Montego Bay, and a large contingent of soldiers were deployed to assist the police in a planned response to the events. Police officers were deployed from neighbouring parishes including Trelawney, Westmoreland and Hanover. Namely, Bob C. Henry and L.L. McGee joined the hunt. Private parties of civilians joined in the search for the wanted Rastafarians. One such party from Flower Hill was led by Holness Roden, who it is said shot one of the wanted Rastafarians. See Randall Mullins, The Demons of Rose Hall, The Daily Gleaner, 28th of March 1964, page 4. First media reports how the incident called it an uprising. That was the term used by both JBC and RGR. The then Jamaica-led party government took great offence at the description of the incident as an uprising, as it saw the use of that word as anti-government. Then Prime Minister Alexander Bustamante was flown to Montego Bay, where he had issued a statement calling for calm and explained that the situation was not an uprising, but the outcome of a robbery attempt on a gas station. Voice newspaper, April 20th, 1963. The then Minister of Development and Welfare, Edward Seeger, wrote to the chairman of both JBC Radio and RGR, threatening that he would restrict broadcasts if they do not correct their irresponsible statements that the Covent Gardens affair was an uprising. This led to the JBC to issue an apology on April 29th for using the word uprising. The Voice newspaper also reported that as at April 20th, 1963, 1 week after events, the police had already arrested over 160 Rastafarians following raids in 4 parishes. Rastafarians were also detained in Falmouth, Lucia and Cambridge. It is to be remembered that by that time, the police had already shot and killed 3 of the wanted men and had already arrested Liebert Jarrett on April 11th and Clifton Larman and Carlton Bowen on April the 13th, 1963, and 2 of whom were later hanged. Now, it's important to note that it was actually Alexander Bustamante, who was the Prime Minister at the time, who actually ordered the Jamaican police officers to do the raid on the Rastafarians constantly, which obviously led up to the events of the Covent Gardens massacre. And also back in 2017, the current Jamaican Prime Minister, whose name is Andrew Holness, he actually his government apologized for the incident that happened, on April 11th, 1963, because as you can see, they tried to say that it was the Rastafarians' fault, saying it was an uprising, or no, they didn't want to agree with it being labelled an uprising. They said that it was anti-government. However, the current government now has actually said, we're going to apologise for the events that happened. And even now, things haven't really improved for Rastafarians that much, because there has been quite a few incidents where Rastafarians have had their children told that they're not allowed to go to certain schools until they cut their locks off. And you have to understand that's their lifestyle. Why should I have to cut their locks? And this is what I'm saying. This event happened in 1963. It's now 2019, and things haven't really improved for them that much. However, Rastafarians don't really have to go in hiding like that anymore. However, to link to this video, there's actually quite a lot of history behind Rastafarians here in the UK. They used to get arrested quite a lot, so I'm going to do another YouTube video on that next week.